Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey.
If you're a Beatles fan, kids, then buddy, are you happy about this episode? Because we got a bunch of them coming. If you followed the 6M podcast for any length of time, you know that we are Beatles fans here on this show, and we'll not have anyone downgrading or trying to downplay the achievements of this band. Shame on you. Go stand in a corner and don't ever speak to me again, okay? But for the rest of you, you're probably hopefully excited to be around for this one because we are finally, after years of this show going strong, we are finally tackling the Beatles Anthology. Now, just so you know how we're laying this thing out, kids, on this episode, we're going to tackle the first two episodes, and you can find this on the Disney app, so go check it out. There's an 8-part series, the Beatles Anthology. So today we are covering parts 1 and 2. And we're going to do that for 4 episodes total, and that'll give you everything you ever needed to know. Now, if you think we're going to give you like a 100% comprehensive, holy cow, this is like just watching the thing live, think again. You'll know why? Because it's very detailed. And because Phil and I are both huge fans, you know, at some point we'd like to sleep and carry on with our lives. So it's going to be incredibly hard to go into minute detail as we would probably both like to do. But we're both fans, so hopefully you enjoy this, and there's a lot to get to, as we said. So before we go any further, let's do this. The Beatles Anthology is a multimedia documentary project released in 1995 to 1996, created by the surviving Beatles and Apple Corps as the official definitive history of the band. In 2025, the anthology celebrated its 30th anniversary. That's right, kids, 30 years. The project includes an 8-part TV documentary produced by Apple Corps, 3 double CD sets featuring rare and previously unreleased recordings, and a massive companion book. The documentary covers the band's origins, early years in Liverpool and Hamburg, and rise to global fame, while CD 1 of Anthology 1 includes early Quarrymen recordings, BBC sessions, Decca audition material, and tracks leading up to Beatlemania. This project marked the Beatles' first major collaborative release since their breakup and featured a newly recorded material produced by Jeff Lynne. And buddy, have we got some stuff to say about that, including the reunion single, Free as a Bird. Also got some stuff to say about that. But that essentially is your lowdown for parts 1 and 2 of the Beatles Anthology. So, Phil, here we go. You and I both have been Beatles fans forever, and we've covered Beatles albums here on the show. We've referenced the anthology numerous times. But, you know, I'm like, well, the thing turns 30 this year. What better time to do it than before the year escapes us? And we are in December of 2025 as we record this. Has it been a while since you watched the anthology, man? Did it all come rushing back to you when you watched it, or what?
I don't know that I've ever seen it in full.
Hmm.
I know that like I've seen Let It Be before Disney Plus did its magic and remastered it.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a completely different movie.
It does.
But I don't know that I've seen the entire anthology before this year.
What did you think about parts 1 and 2?
Very detailed. Some of this stuff I knew as a Beatles fan, somebody that's watched a ton of documentaries about the group. But yeah, very detailed. The first 2 episodes covers a lot of the stuff that happened before Beatlemania, and like we get a lot of finer details of like, you know, the foundational things for this group, like what brought them together, their upbringing, you know, who they are as people and everything before they started the band.
It's a lot. Like you said, it's very detailed. It's a lot, man. The early days when they all became friends, Ringo was the oldest, of course. George was the youngest. They talk about Hamburg in part 1. I mean, it's, them learning how to become a band. And, we learned about Pete Best and Stuart Sutcliffe. We'll get to those guys in a bit. But yeah, dude, at this point, Phil, this stuff is like legendary, right? Like we've seen you know, various different projects lampoon the Beatles' history, or we've seen fictional accounts of fictional bands, but they'll often follow some of the tropes that actually happened to this group, man. It's crazy how their real lives outside of the recording studio still influence people to this day. It's nuts.
Yeah. They also spend a lot of time showing us all of their influences,
Mhm.
like all of the early rock pioneers that they listened to and what made them want to learn how to play and what made them want to start a band.
Mhm. Yeah, they of
Uh,
course talk about Elvis. They of course talk about Little Richard, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly plays a big role. I mean, it was Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Of course, they're the Beatles. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I did not recognize it because, of course, I was not around in the '60s,
mhm,
and so I can't say that I listened to Buddy Holiday or any of this stuff, but
mhm.
I can't remember the song that Buddy Holly is doing. But then when I listened to it, I was like, oh, it's the song that Hank Hill basically parodies in King of the Hill that he wrote for his wife. That's like my peg a leg. It's the same melody and everything.
I forgot about that, man. Yeah, Peggy Sue was about Buddy's girlfriend, I think, at the time. I think Buddy Holly's a great topic, man. He's grew up a poor kid in Texas, I believe, and like when they started to hit it big, no internet in the '60s, of course, as everybody knows. But they had him playing the Apollo, him and the band, and they roll up, and no one had any idea they were white.
Yeah.
And it becomes, well, dude, if you go out there, they might eat you alive. And Buddy's like, look, man, music's music. Just let us go play. And they tore the house down. So I think Buddy Holly, not to get too sidetracked, Phil, but I think Buddy Holly is just a great example of, man, what could have been had this guy lived. He was so smart, such a good musician, great songwriter, and man, gone way too soon. But yeah, man, he was huge inspiration on the Beatles, and they were into Motown and soul music, and they incorporated a lot of soul music later on as they got into their careers and covered some of those songs. And Little Richard, of course, as we know. It's funny that they mention Richard, but do they actually give him his flowers in here for that's the guy that brought us to Hamburg to begin with?
Not really. They touch on Little Richard. They, of course, like acknowledge that that's where uh, Paul McCartney gets some of his trademark growl and like his voicing and everything because they play
Mhm.
these things close to each other, so you can hear them in proximity. But I don't think that they really uh, go into how influential Little Richard was for them.
Yeah, I mean, you hear them talk about it through the years in other formats, and we got a long way to go till we're through this project here. But I'm sure that they circle back around to it at some point. But yeah, he helped put him on the map, and
Yeah.
Paul's version of Long Tall Sally is great. And again, they took their cues a lot from their inspirations. They do mention Elvis, of course, because kids, I wasn't around when Elvis broke. But I'm telling you, I can't imagine like, did you go from, and I think this was said in the documentary that we covered here on the 6M about the Beatles, about their first US visit. And I forget who it was in that documentary that said it, but like, it was like someone turned the lights on the first time I saw the Beatles on Sullivan. I imagine it was that way for a lot of kids the first time they saw Elvis. Like you went from nothing to this guy. Like,
Yeah.
insanity, man. But they do credit him quite a bit. It makes sense. Kids, the origins of this project, just so we're all on the same page here, this thing dates all the way back to the late 1960s when the Beatles discussed a documentary called The Long and Winding Road. That thing, I believe, was in what we as comic book nerds call developmental hell for a while. The project stalled for decades due to legal disputes. No wonders why there. Apple Corps restructuring it during the time, interpersonal issues among the former members. By the late 80s and early 90s, relationships had improved, and Apple began planning an official, controlled retelling of the Beatles' history, and that's what got us to the anthology. Phil, I told you off mic I watched this in real time, and I can't tell you how excited I was watching this. When you go back and watch this, like you're seeing the early years and the formation of the band and everything, it kind of feels like the planets were lining up just right for these guys to be in the same location at the same time. Because John himself said, you can hear the audio of John saying, it wouldn't have been the Beatles had it not been the four of us. If you'd put anybody else in this group, it's not the Beatles, it's not the same. Like, Phil, I think it's one of those things that like it just happened to be. I don't know if I believe in karma or anything like that, but does that strike you as, man, I can't believe everything lined up the way it did for these guys?
Yeah, I think a lot of things, based on what I knew about them, needed to line up correctly. And I mean, that's happened for, more, musical acts and more celebrities than the Beatles. That it was the right chain of events that got them to
Mm,
where they were. It was the
mhm.
right people in their lives that cultivated their talent and inspired them to get to where they were. Um, so yeah, I think that there's so much that's important to their story. But of course, the uh one of the more famous things that is like part of their lore, even part of their name, of them not having a drummer for a long time. And we get the great line, I think, in the first episode, where Paul's like, "Yeah, we'll let the guitars play the rhythm for us," and it's like we don't need a drummer. And of course, Beatles. Another way to look at it is like they were beatless. They had no drummer for a long time.
Right. Yeah, no drummer. And then when they went to Hamburg, they were told, "Well, you had to be a five piece. You have to have a drummer." And play. And again, they demanded for whatever reason you had to be a five piece. So Pete Best came in, and um, you know, we don't have to spend forever on Pete. I'm sure you're aware of the sort of the legend here of Pete Best. Phil, you see those pictures of Pete with the guys, and maybe this isn't fair to Pete at all because we know what the other three became. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, could Pete have come out of his shell and become the man, the kind of guy that the other three were? Or like, I don't know, man. It's impossible to say, but what do you think about that, man? Did he get the shaft from what you know? Was it too much? Like, did he deserve that stuff or what?
It's just how it goes. Everybody can't come along.
Yeah,
And in order to get where you're supposed to be, unfortunately, sometimes people get left behind. And it's not necessarily because that person did something wrong. It's just the right combination of guys in this group is what made it work. And Ringo definitely added a cool factor to this group that Pete Best did not.
mm,
Um, I know that Paul and some of the others have talked about this more than once, that he brought a lot of their lingo, their verbiage that they use for their naming conventions for some of the songs, and
hmm
like just everything about him. Like it's something about him that is different. There's a zaniness to him. There's a quirkiness to him that he brings to this band that just fits perfectly with them. And it's hard to imagine the group without him. Like if it's just he just adds so much, even though he's not the greatest drummer in the world, which has been the subject of a lot of conversation. But
sure.
I think he brings so much more than just keeping the tempo and being a drummer.
You're right, and much in the same way that Stewart brought things to this band that helped define who they were at the time. Like he brought the style. Astrid was his girlfriend. Astrid was connected to this band,
Hmm.
just as Klaus Forman was connected to this band for years. Klaus actually designed the covers for the anthology, and they had a big hand, like in their look. They got the haircuts because of Astrid, and that style and that mod, sensibility. And you had Stuart Sutcliffe look like James Dean with that hair. And I mean, art college, man, I'm sure is a different kind of vibe, but I'm here for it. Like I love the creativity part of this. And Phil, you remove all of that from this band early on, who knows what they would have turned into later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just meet a lot of people at the same time at some point in your life, and they just inspire you. like how you dress, who you are, like you could just point to so many times and our own lives where, oh, I met that friend and I thought that they were cool, so I tried to dress like them, or I tried
Yeah.
to you know be around them and hang out with them, and you could definitely see that a lot in the first and second episode, in the formation of the group. But yeah, every time I see those old pictures of them when they were playing all of the those like seedy little um those seedy bars and stuff they were in, and they're wearing the leather jackets, and they all have like kind of like the Elvis updo, and
Mm-hmm.
it looks like a different band. They look like a bunch of backgrounders for in Greece. They look like the T-Birds. That's the name of the.
That's it. Yeah,
They
yeah,
look
yeah.
like T-Birds.
Yeah, man. Definitely had the style at the time. But yeah, they just think, man, they're on that stage in Germany. George at the time was underage. He was 17, didn't tell anybody. He lied about his age over there so he could play. And the other guys were like 18. Ringo was 19, I'm sure, at that time. Like, and dude, they were playing every night and, taking pills to keep going, stay wound up so they could stay awake. And that was their lives, man. Like, because, they were hungry for it. Like I'm sure we've said this before on the show, Phil, but like nothing's ever come out of Liverpool ever. Like, and I got friends in Liverpool now, so no disrespect, boys. I'm just saying. But at the time, nothing had ever come out of Liverpool. And they knew that. And they're like, I don't want to work in a factory. I don't want that to be my life. I got to get out of here. John, especially, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
So, like, Phil, I guess when you have that driving you, you'll stop at nothing. The formation of the Quarrymen, John and Paul meet very young. George joins up. The way they told the stories of George could play raunchy, he could play that song, and he knew it note for note. And you know, uh, they were impressed with Paul because Paul could tune a guitar by ear, which John didn't know how to do at the time. So kids, young guys hanging out, as we said, and um, skiffle. All right, because the Quarrymen were skiffle. How much you know about skiffle there, Phil?
Not very much.
You ain't missing much, buddy. I'm telling you.
Yeah, but there's so much of I think you really get an idea in the first two episodes of how they really came along during the foundational years of rock and roll music, before rock and roll music really took off as this worldwide craze. It was still niche. It was still smaller.
Hmm.
And like even when they were talking about learning how to play, and there were certain places where it's like, oh, you can't come in here unless you're playing jazz. It's like, oh, this guitar band thing, that's not gonna last.
Right? Yeah, yeah. Decca tells them guitar bands are on the way out.
Yeah.
Like,
It's wild
what?
to think about that now. Like that's I mean, but that's also just like when you talked about Elvis and how much he changed things. Like no matter what you may think of Elvis, Elvis can be polarizing.
Hmm.
Elvis was absolutely a cultural reset. And what he did for rock and roll music to help make it like this big um globally accepted music. It's it's you can't undervalue it. You can't over exaggerate just what he did for rock music.
100%. Yeah, it's. I totally agree with you. And we've tried to give credit where credit's due here on this show, kids. To the original artist, we always try to do the right thing for that. And there is no first anybody that did anything. Elvis may have been the first white guy to be popular doing it, but he
Yeah.
wasn't the first to do anything he was doing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have Ike Turner, Chuck Berry,
Hmm.
some of these pioneers that really started the genre, uh, then there is no Elvis, of course. But Elvis as this face that changed how the world saw rock music was very important.
Hmm.
Like I said, yeah, there are controversies like him taking, you know, black artists' music and performing it on mainstream radio. Yes, but at that time, a black artist wouldn't have done for rock and roll music what Elvis did. They wouldn't have been allowed to.
That's true. No, no, you're not wrong. Yeah. Fortunately, you're not wrong. Yeah. Yeah. But like we said, kids, he was an absolute An absolute inspiration. The Cavern Club factors into the first episode, which I really love. How cool is it that that footage still exists of them in the Cavern Club in 1962? Is that crazy?
Yeah, a lot of the footage that they show in this of the band has still held up very well.
Hmm.
I'm sure some of it has been remastered and stuff for the Disney Plus, but it still looks pretty good. It
Hmm.
still is held up pretty well. It's not overly grainy. It's not uh, it's not undiscernible. You can recognize all the people you're supposed to recognize in it. When you were talking about like how hungry they were and how there was nothing in Liverpool but factories, I think that's why it's so important initially in the first episode where they're doing the voiceovers and each of them is explaining like who their parents were and where they
Hmm.
came from, and it shows like the pictures of them as babies and like basically like what was set out in front of them if they didn't do music. Like, this is what my mother did, and this is, this is the area of Liverpool or England I grew up in, and this is what basically this was the world for everybody in this part of the world. Um, this wasn't the type of place that made rock and roll singers.
It's like, and I'm not trying to make a direct comparison to the blues here, Phil, but like, a lot of the world's best music comes from hardship. It comes
Yes,
from, right? Like you grow up thinking,
Mississippi,
man,
dirt poor.
yes, yes. I mean, just imagine waking up and it's because man, every time I see these videos or pics, everything's gray. Like
Yes.
it's raining all the time. The sun never shines. It's always cloudy, which I'm sure isn't always true, but like that's what they'd have you believe from all these flashbacks and stuff. And I'm like, man, if I grew up seeing that every day, maybe I'd be like, God, you got to get me out of here. I'm going to die here, you know?
Yeah, it's not this flashy upbringing like when you look at like the beginnings of jazz, for example,
Hmm.
and like how cool it sounds to be a part of like the Harlem Renaissance, for example, and being in New York and being a part of that music scene. Now there was nothing in Liverpool, and like when you think about it now, like you said, how much things have changed. People make pilgrimages to
Oh,
Liverpool.
man.
It just that wasn't a thing. That
Right.
was not a thing at that time period.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go. I'll make it there one day. It's on the bucket list.
Boink Studios YouTube is the home of Tom Clark's 6M podcast. Tom Clark's main event, Bear Mode, a podcast review of The Bear, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Subscribe to the channel for archives that date back to 2014, with new content being uploaded every week. And check out boinkstudios.com for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Bookmark the site today.
The bit where they talk about their families, I'm glad you brought that up because, like, we hear about John's mom who plays a very heavy role in his life. I mean, a lot of John's best material and most, hardest to listen to material comes from her
Yes,
because, she left him. And, you know, the stuff with Paul's mom, of course, we don't get Let It Be without Paul's mom. I mean,
yes.
that
Um,
story's fantastic.
Yes, that's when you look back at it and you look at the deterioration of the band and the deterioration of their friendship and how when they were at their worst and John puts out the how can you sleep, and he calls him a mama's boy in it. The thing that they bonded over initially was not having their mothers in their lives,
It's
and they
true.
had gotten so far from that point once they were not getting along that he threw it in his face that he's a mama's boy.
Such a cheap shot too. You know what I mean? Like I'm not Paul can't be the easiest person to live with, I'm sure, but like, come on, man, that's low. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I think it also it paints the picture of just how different they are. Yes, they bonded over not having their mothers in their lives, but they lost their mothers in different ways. And I think
Yeah.
that John has such a tragic relationship with his mother, and Paul's it's so different. His mother was taken away from him so early because she died, and so I think it almost came out at that time, for at least from my point of view, it not just a cheap shot. It kind of felt like resentful, almost Like he still has like so much anguish around his mother leaving, and he doesn't have like the same adoration in some ways.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's Paul and John loved each other, man. Like they all four did, I'm sure. But like it really starts with those two guys, and
Yeah. Yeah.
just like when you have two linchpins of any group, Phil, when that relationship breaks down, it's over.
Yes. And if you're really good friends with anybody, you're going to disagree. You're going to argue. You're going to get on each other's nerves. You're going to annoy people. And, back to him calling him mama's boy, um, nobody knows how to really
Yeah,
cut you deep like somebody that knows you and somebody that really loves you because they know like the things that are like your real weak points, your real soft spots.
I got to be honest with you, man. Listen, I'm not the only one that does this. I'm sure we've all done it and instantly regretted it. I've been in the heat of an argument more than once, and in my head, gone, "Go ahead and say that. That'll get them. That'll get them. Say it." And I'm like, don't say it. Sometimes I say it because I'm human and I F up, right? And the minute you say it, you're like, it's out there. And the only thing you can do after the fact is like, look, man, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have went there. That's on me. You know what I mean? But you're right. It can be weaponized against each other.
Yeah.
Well, kids, we also get here, again, as we said, the very first formations of the group, we get them going to Germany. We get their inspirations, as we said. Again, they were influenced by several different artists. We get clips of Elvis here. Big Bill Broonzy's even here, which is very cool.
Hmm.
But yeah, we get again, we get all that from the very beginning. The Cavern Club scenes, as we mentioned, um, very cool. The Quarrymen recordings. We talked about Buddy Holly's song "That'll Be the Day," which is a friggin' classic. Paul McCartney writes "In Spite of All the Danger," and the recording still exists. And Phil, he wrote that thing when he was like 15 or something. I'm like, how in the world are you that great? You don't even know. You don't even know who you are as a man at that point. You're not even a man technically yet. Like when I was 64, he wrote it when he was 12 or 13 or something like that. I think. Like, dude, I don't. I can't even wrap my head around. We've talked about the genius of Paul here before. And not to say the other three guys aren't amazing. Of course they are, but without Paul's vision, I guess you could say, and his creative drive, still don't know if it definitely wouldn't be the same band. You know what I mean? Can you imagine like Paul not being part of this? That's crazy to me.
Yeah. And, kind of the funny thing about it is a lot of the things that he did for this group that are really his claim to fame or what made him like a tentpole in this group, he did out of necessity. Like he and George both played guitar
Mhm.
and they needed a bass player. So he just eventually picked up bass. It wasn't that he knew how to play bass. It was just like we kind of need a bass player. And so I better learn how to play. And you can definitely see that for like the first 3 albums or so. I feel like he gets good at bass by around like Rubber Soul.
Mhm.
At least that's where you can see the drastic improvement in him as a bass player. Um, but yeah, even like you're saying with him writing the songs initially, it's that we needed to start writing our own songs. That was the thing that was gonna help us
Mhm.
stand out. They pointed that out, I believe, in the first episode as well, that everybody played covers, including us. Like that was what everybody did. They just went from bar to bar, gig to gig, playing covers. If we were gonna really stand out and be a real band, we needed to write our own stuff.
They knew that very early on. You know what I mean? That's what impressed them. The musicianship, yeah, that's important. How to play, sure. But what impressed him the most about other artists was that they were writing their own material. They freaking love that. And they got off on it like that's what we have to do, man.
Yeah, because I mean, you could really say, and I'm sure some people, well, a lot of Beatle detractors would say this, that they weren't like the best musicians. Um, but really, the thing that really pushed them ahead of a lot of bands was their songwriting.
Absolutely. And to the point of their musicianship, anybody that's got an axe to grind against the Beatles, first of all, you're freaking weird. But second, they were doing things in the studio that no other band was doing, but they
Yeah,
did it later. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Absolutely. I think that they, timing is big in entertainment.
Mm.
In multiple forms of entertainment business, timing is paramount. And so they came around at the right time. They were very innovative for their time period. And so I think that's what some people later on that discover the Beatles are missing when they say, well, what makes them so great? Because there are other bands that play their instruments better and they're better musicians. But again, I don't think the musicianship is really what put them over.
No, I agree. I do agree with you to a certain extent, but I do think that when later on, when they stop touring and they could actually spend time in the studio, and you hear those layered instruments and the textured vocals, and then you realize, holy cow, they're very good. But like, and we'll get there, and we get there. I think it's in episode 3, I believe 3 or 4, when they're interviewing the guys about no longer touring, and Paul's like, "Well, look, we can't hear ourselves play, and we
Yeah.
can't get better, and if we can't hear ourselves play, we can't get better, and we want to get better," which they did, obviously.
Yes. Um, but yeah, just them as a live band is so important to their story.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, like, I don't want to say that the musicianship wasn't that important, as in that they were bad musicians. I just think that it's not as important as their songwriting and what they developed into as a live touring act. And there's so many rock acts that was a part of what made them special is they
Mhm.
were they were performers.
Yeah, dude, you're totally on point. Because like, if they didn't have charisma on stage, these albums don't sell.
No,
But, they made their bread and butter by touring England, then touring the United States, and touring Germany and the world, and even going to Japan, and, like, man, they were listen, again, kids, if you don't like the Beatles, I'm feel bad for you. But look, dude, when you watch these old clips, how are you not tapping your foot? Look, the energy just jumps. I know I'm biased. The energy just jumps out of the video to me. And this happened in the 60s. Isn't that crazy? It's still there, you know?
I think two things happen often when I talk to people that are not Beatles fans,
Mhm.
or it's not even they're indifferent to the Beatles; they just don't like them. I feel like two things
Mm.
happen: either they don't understand the hype because they're coming after the fact, and so it's hard to
Right. Yeah.
really explain to somebody the hype and the popularity of them when Beatlemania exploded. But then also it's the style of music at that time. And if you're not into like the earlier doo-wop stuff and like uh the early rock records, because a lot of people, some people think that that kind of music is boring, for example. Um, if you just don't understand where, like, what influenced it, what inspired it, it's hard to really get people to understand that without like going into like a whole a whole like a whole a whole presentation on rock music and the history of rock music.
Mhm. And you know what? If someone says to me, I only listen to hip hop, I don't do rock, so I don't care about the Beatles. You know what? I get it. If someone says to me, I only listen to jazz, I don't mess with rock, it's not for me, I don't care about the Beatles. Okay. I think it's weird on both fronts, but you do you. But when someone tells me, I love rock and roll, but the Beatles they suck, I'm like, on what planet are you living? Because, brother, let me tell you, and you know this, your favorite drummer, his favorite drummer is Ringo Starr, okay? And your favorite band, the Beatles influenced that band. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I just can't wrap my head around the hate for Ringo, the hate for the band, hate. Like, I don't understand that. And dude, musicians from all walks of life, from every genre, flat out tell you, if not for the Beatles, I wouldn't be here. They're the
Yes.
reason I'm here. And by the way, those artists inspired people after them, and then we get to 2025. I'm not saying everything's cause and effect, Phil, but I got a real hard time believing that if this band doesn't happen, we get a third of the groups and singers that came after the fact.
Yes. But that's what I'm saying. I don't think people, there are some people that grew up in a certain era of rock music. So they grew up around the music that they love and they
Mhm.
don't connect the two. They don't connect the history of rock music and what came before it. they just see it as, oh, I don't like that music. It's boring. It's too slow and soft, and that's not for me.
Mhm.
Like a lot of like big metal fans and certain other rock fans, they're not Beatles fans for that reason. And it's just a preference thing. It's a cultural thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Uh, like I said, when you have to explain to them like, oh, how important they were to rock music, how influential they were, and all these other things, you can't get them to understand it. Some people ran with that Quincy Jones quote from a few years ago, and as usual, context is important
Mhm.
because that was Quincy Jones told the story of being in the studio with them and outright calling them some non-playing MFers, and how he had to have like the studio drummer come in and play Ringo's parts because he could not get it right. And the context that people are missing here is we're talking about Quincy Jones, probably the greatest producer of all time, a guy that played multiple instruments. And so, yeah, he's looking at these guys like the rudimentary stuff in comparison to stuff he was doing, composing, and all these other things. Yeah, he's looking at them in this way because this is like a once in a lifetime musician.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. And his bar is extremely high.
Exactly. So his bar for musicianship is higher than the average music listener.
And none of the four of these guys, to my knowledge, had any formal training. They weren't taught
No,
anything. They just played.
no, and like I said, we're talking about Quincy Jones, uh, classically trained, jazz, all these other things that the of one of the most versatile producers of all time that has
Mhm.
done something that has he's either produced for artists in multiple genres or multiple genres have been influenced by him or sampled what he did. Uh, yeah, Quincy feeling that way about them is different than just an average music listener that doesn't know half of the stuff he knows about music.
Oh, dude, I completely agree. Yeah. And as we go through part one here, kids, we're going to jump to part two here shortly. But um, we said this before at the opening that the anthology CD sets were three sets. So we are talking about the music that came from their early days, of course, and everything that started coming in parts one and part two. But it needs to be said, I don't think we hear "Free as a Bird" in either parts one or part two. I don't think that's coming later, but it's in my notes, and I know we're going to circle back to it. And so we'll spend a minute or two on this. But Jeff Lynne is fine, and I like ELO, and I've always liked Jeff Lynne, so it's nothing personal against him at all. But George wanted Jeff involved here, and later on they're both traveling Wilburys, and I totally get it. And Jeff's a talented guy, so no disrespect, but this is not George Martin on these songs, and it shows.
No,
Um, dude, you hear the vocals, you hear John's vocals. I mean, he's saying this into a tape recorder because it was John, and that's how he did his thing. And then they recovered these cassettes, and then now Phil, you could take that vocal and clean it up and make it sound like he's in the room with you. But at the time, they used the technology they had. I'm saying all this to say this: I don't think his voice fits with the others at all, and it'll make you emotional if you're a Beatles fan. I can't say it's never done that for me. It has, but after having some distance from myself in this for a while, the anthology, this song doesn't fit. And
mm.
I love the guys, but Phil, it doesn't fit. How you feel about "Free as a Bird"?
It doesn't sound like a Beatles song.
Hmm.
It doesn't sound like the harmony that we're used to from the four guys that make up that group. It just, and I think it's just because we have an entire discography that we're used to.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, it doesn't fit. It kind of feels like the Smile song uh that Freddie Mercury comes in and does lead vocal for before the band becomes Queen. Uh,
Yeah.
what is the song? It's on their first album. Funny enough, doing all right.
Mm,
Uh, and doing all right. It sounds so different from the rest of their music once Freddie started writing the songs and he was lead vocalist.
right. Yeah, I mean, I don't fault them for doing this. I mean, they had Yoko's approval, John Lennon's estate. I mean, they checked the boxes, Phil. They were his brothers. I mean, if anyone's going to do this, better they do it than anybody else. And I totally understand it. I know why they did it. I get it, but it doesn't sound good. I mean, John's voice just it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. And
No.
I've
Um,
always thought that John would have a good laugh about this if he were still around. If he could hear this, be like, "Oh, that's what you did." Oh,
yeah. Uh, yeah, I love the recordings of him where he's just like screaming into the microphone and he's losing his voice trying to replicate this every time when he's recording it, and he's like
hmm
straining trying to sing. Um, but again, that just points that indicates how important like the live performances were to them initially,
hmm
because yeah, him going out there and doing these songs on the road and going to all of these gigs and singing, and he's up there screaming. Yeah, it's part of the experience of going to see them. But like you going in there and going into a recording studio and trying to record this over and over again, yeah, probably not the best on your voice.
hmm
Probably not the most listenable experience either.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, twist and shout that John was because when they recorded the first Beatles album, they saved twist and shout till the end because they knew it was going to destroy John's voice, so they did it last,
Yeah,
which is great.
it's such a great song for live performances.
Yeah.
It has this phonetic energy to it for like call and response for a crowd. And it's supposed to represent that on the band. I think that's also why it goes on last, because it's such a showstopper probably.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I can't imagine him trying to sing like that for the entirety of his time with the Beatles. That would have gotten old very
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, man. I mean, and plus at some point, they're screaming over a crowd that can't even hear them play. it's and we'll get there and we get there. When Beatlemania hits, it's as I said, it's a nuclear freaking warhead going off. It's insane. Before I let anybody believe that I'm just going to crap on Free as a Bird and move on, the John Lennon demo actually came from '77. That's how old it was. Paul, George, and Ringo recorded the new parts in '94, and it was released with the music video with a lot of Easter eggs in it, which is pretty cool. It did win the Grammy Award for Best Pop Performance by a Duo Group with Vocals in '96. So the Beatles managed to achieve fame many, many years after the fact. It debuted at number one in the United States. It meaning the anthology CD set hit number one in the United States. So it worked. It got over, as pro wrestling fans would say. The overall reception was very positive, culturally significant. I'll say. Here's what I'll tell you, Phil. In terms of this, the first episode setting the tone. We set the tone for the Beatles' working class beginnings, their hunger, as we said. It presents the four guys not as icons, but as teenagers, just as kids. It humanizes the four of them before, fame changes everything. But part one also establishes the friendships, like we talked about,
Yes.
the years before the fame, the deep influences, like we said, the work ethic and the ambition. I mean, what an amazing first part to their story. You know what I mean? And it just
Yeah.
gets better from here.
Yeah. It establishes why they galvanized as a band, why they
hmm
became a band, why live performances were so important to the band, and it makes it that much more tragic when they stop doing live because the
Yeah.
the fame becomes too much. Um, One of my big takeaways, because I don't remember if I saw the anthology all the way through, but I have seen Let It Be multiple times,
Mm.
and um, this really contextualizes why they're having so fun playing One After 909, because it sounds so similar to the music they played back then. I believe it's like the lore is that it's a song written during that time period. And so when you look at Let It Be now after seeing this, and you see how much fun they're having playing it when they're doing it in the sessions, and then when they perform it on a rooftop, it really feels like they're having fun because they hadn't done that in a long time, and it took them back to that period of performing when they were first getting started.
Yeah, I love One After 909. I was listening to it this morning. It's a great song. I actually prefer the original version that they did versus the one that they
Yeah.
did later.
Of course, Phil Spector got his touches on it
Of course he
later.
did.
And very controversial figure for a lot of reasons, Phil Spector. But um, I think, of course, him and Paul clashed over some of the changes he made sound wise. I'll never forget uh, the production for Wah Wah for the George Harrison's first solo album.
Mhm.
And Phil Spector comes in and does his wall of sound technique with it. And George comes in and listens to it first time and he's like, I hate it.
That's
And
great.
Phil's like, it's great. It's going to be a hit. And he's like, well, you put it on your album.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my. Well, we can't move on here to part 2 without mentioning that we get Brian Epstein and we get Sir George Martin in part 1, and we get them in the studio for the first time. Pete Best has been shown the door. Ringo's full-time drummer at that point, and it's off to the races we go. I love how part 1 ends with the fan saying that she was there when they got the news that the song was number 1. And I'm trying, was it She Loves You that was number 1? Please Please Me hit number 1. And
Yeah.
that they didn't know. And so they were told. She was there in real time when they were told. And she says it was a terrible night because we at that point we knew we'd lost them.
Yes.
And I'm like, Phil, that's a real fan, brother. Like you think, well, she should be happy for them. They're the hometown band. But she's like, no, these are my guys. They're our band, and now we're going to lose them. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy, but it's such great foreshadowing for the rest of their careers because, again, they weren't able to be that same band anymore. They got to the point where they couldn't tour anymore. That the fame of the Beatles had gotten too big, and also what it did to their relationships, their friendships. Yeah, after the first episode, all of that stuff that we knew about them getting up to the climax of this episode, everything changes from this point on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part two opens up with George talking, saying that he doesn't know how long it's going to last. Might be 2 or 3 years, and then that'll
Yeah.
be it. That'll be the end of it.
I I love the quote from Ringo, and it's from, I don't know when that is recorded, but I think like some of the later stuff with the Beatles that is spliced in. Like there's the interview with Ringo where he's talking about, well, I realized things had changed where
Yep.
I was in a bar and I spilled something on myself, and then somebody was like, "Oh, you gotta get you cleaned up." Like he was like, "That wasn't a thing before." Like
Yeah,
it showed you
he
how
was
much everything changed.
he was in his family's house, and they made a fuss over it. His own family made a fuss over it.
Yeah, we gotta get you cleaned up. We can't let you be that way.
He's like, well, that never would have happened before. That's yeah. And also in those interviews, as part 2 opens, and I've never forgotten these interviews because they stay with me forever. But John saying, we'll be lucky if we last, 3 months. And then Paul's like, the thing that John and I wants to do is we want to write hits for songs for other people. This guy's 21, Phil, 20 years old when he says this. I'm like, what? He's already thinking down the road, dude.
Well, you got to think at that time, bands didn't look like them. Uh, the prototypical rock star did not look like them, and they certainly didn't come from Liverpool. So
Right.
I gotta imagine that some of this is like, yeah, we caught a lick. Like we got very popular in our hometown, but this might be the ceiling for us. Like this isn't. We're not gonna become like Elvis. Like even the way that Paul talks about Elvis and how like he's so good looking and all these other things, like
Mm.
he's tall and all these other things, like that doesn't fit the description for most of the Beatles.
Yeah, and the quotes in here, the music in this episode, as this episode kicks off, man, you're getting a lot of their early music, which I freaking love. I love their early days. I do. Like I love a lot of that early stuff. Even their early covers that they were doing. The Kansas City song, I love that melody. It just
hmm
I don't know, man. Like I'm a huge fan anyway, so I'm loving it. But like the quotes about Elvis always get me because when George says in this episode, I kind of felt bad for him because, he didn't have anybody. He had his boys, but his boys didn't understand what it was to be on stage and go through a tour. Only he knew. And he's like, the four of us had each other. I've never forgotten that.
Yeah, yeah, that's very important to their story as well. that they had each other, but that's also what led to the demise. It wasn't just Elvis. And so Elvis had a vision for what he was. Now, of course, the Colonel came in and, you know,
Mhm.
ruined a lot of things after that. But like when you've got four people that have an idea of what they want this to be, there's eventually going to be some dissension. There's going to be some disagreement.
Mhm. Yeah. But we get a lot of behind the scenes stuff in episode 2, kids. We get a lot of Sir George Martin. We hear Brian Epstein talking and just some great stuff in here. We hear them in the studio and, all 3 CD sets of this, which, I mean, now it's digital, of course, but you hear them backstage or in the studio during, between cuts and stuff, and the voices are perfect. It's almost like actors doing the voices, Phil. It's them.
Yeah.
But there's that bit where Paul's they're doing one after 909 and they stop and John's like, "What's going on?" And Paul's like, I can't keep going. I can't keep doing this. Cause he plays the bass, just the bass, and you can hear how intense the bass is to keep driving that beat.
Hmm.
And so they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we time this where you can actually keep playing this freaking song? It's wonderful. I love that stuff.
Yeah, that's the same reason I love when they're playing a rendition of "This Girl," and
Yes.
George is singing. He's like, "That girl."
Right.
Say the lyrics correctly. What's going on? It's not the right lyric.
Yeah.
He jokes later. Well, if I say that girl, it's staying in there.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. Yeah, man, watching them on stage singing Twist and Shout. And we got to give the shout out to the way that this thing was cut. When they cut all the concert footage together for one song and spliced it, it's so great, dude. You see them in like all the different suits and different locations where they're playing. I think the
Yeah,
way the thing is cut is very, very impressive.
that's one of those things where I think a documentary will always be able to express more than a movie because you already have the footage. You can do things in editing that you can't always be able to do creating something from scratch and then trying to edit
Well, we haven't even mentioned those movies, and they're coming.
it. 4
4
movies.
Beatles movies on the same. Yeah, dude, what? I
Yeah.
don't know how I feel. I don't know how I feel, man.
Yeah. Is it episode 2 where we're getting to the point where Ringo is going to become the band's drummer and they ask him to come and then he shows up and he's like, "No. No, we don't." And he's disappointed cuz he's like, I was prepared to be in the band and they turned me away." Like, what happened?
Yeah, that was the end of part 1 because they brought in Ringo's
Yes.
words, Andy White, professional drummer. Yeah.
Yes.
And George is like, "Hey, I got burned with Pete Best. You're not going to burn me again. I don't know this guy. I got my own guy. We're using this guy." So, dude, I'm telling you, George Martin, who had never done rock and roll before, this guy said, "Well, I don't want you drummer." Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying Pete couldn't play, dude, but Pete must have been not playing well. And I love that he mentions that he never that he gave George Martin grief over it for years. They didn't let him play.
Yeah, I think it's something to it that poor Pete Best, I just don't think he had that it factor that the other guys had.
I just don't think he did, and it's hard to say. I mean, I've seen interviews with him over the years, and seems like a nice enough guy and everything, but his entire career was based off of I was in the Beatles at one point, which is wild to me. We kind of glommed over this and didn't even mention it that the Beatles, the way they got their name, of course, John's always claimed he had a dream of a man on a flying pie, and he said, "You're Beatles with an A." But I always thought there was more to it than that. I think everybody does. And I think that again, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, they were heavily inspired by Buddy Holly. And also Beats, Beat, Beats in the music, which makes a lot of sense. but I think that's just John being cheeky. And also, the Beatles were mentioned as a motorcycle gang in that one movie, and that was so it was already a thing. And they called themselves the Silver Beatles in the beginning, and they never mentioned that in the anthology. I always found that weird too.
Yeah, probably for some legal reasons. They don't want to give anybody ideas that they inspired the name of the group, so they could probably attempt to take credit for it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I do
Probably
like that
not
we're
very smart.
getting. Yeah, no, for sure. I do like that we're getting the cast of characters. Neil Aspinall. I love that Neil's here. I've always been a fan of Neil. I think he just seems like a regular guy, straight shooter, huge asset to the band. So I love that he's in here, and every time he speaks, I'm like, yeah, this. I like that he's attached to this. So that was pretty cool. Good to see Neil. I mean, dude, not only did the four of them have each other, Phil, but they had a great support system. I mean, before
Yes.
Brian died, he was a great support system, and they had their guys around them. I'm not going to say it was a guarantee that this was going to work, but they did have some people helping them along the way, which is good.
Yeah, and they started to lose that towards the end,
Hmm.
and I I I sometimes wonder if that didn't happen, if they didn't lose George, would they have split up?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I mean, in the end, Paul had quit during the Let It Be sessions. I mean, at any given point, I think all of them walked out. Each one of them walked out individually. But then it was over. I mean, dude, I often wonder, we all have, I'm sure, if you're a Beatles fan, but I've often wondered, like, what would have happened if John had not passed? Do you think that by all rights, he and Paul had reconciled at the end, but who knows if they ever would have recorded together again, man? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, of course, like famously, George walked out on
Hmm.
the Let It Be sessions as well.
He did.
But yeah, they're not very nice to George towards the end, man.
No, they're not. No,
It's
not at all.
unfortunate. They're not very nice.
Yeah, it all comes crashing down later. But yeah, Mount Evans is here as well. And I'm gonna be honest with you, man. They were not nice to Mount Evans. There's a whole other story about how they mistreated Mal. Mal died in a bad way. It was not good. I mean, he the argument could be made they didn't take care of Mal, which is a shame. So if you ever get a chance, Phil, to go down that rabbit hole, it'll surprise you. But
Yeah.
yeah, Mal had a tough life, man. So yeah, rest in peace to him for sure. Yeah, as we said, kids, as we're getting into part two here, they've got their careers and we're seeing them in England. We're seeing a lot of clips. They're really a fully formed band. They've got their record deal. There's behind the scenes clips. There's clips of them at the beach, which I love. Uh, Phil, is this like the most photographed and filmed band of all time? I kind of feel like they are.
Yeah, yeah. Where is all of this footage coming from? Where are all these pictures coming from? I mean, of course, it's explained because Paul explains that they had their friend. But I guess that's kind of the beauty of starting around, people that were artists and having so many creative people around them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I just don't know if we've ever seen an artist like Elvis, of course, photographed and videoed quite a bit. Um, you can make the case for other acts through the years. Run DMC's been photographed and videoed quite a bit. I mean, I guess depending on who you're talking about, but man, the Beatles are everywhere. It seems like every time I've been handing a lot of Beatles stuff over the years, Phil. I don't know if you have, but like every time I get handed a book of pictures, like here, Merry Christmas, Tom. I'm like, thank you, this is awesome, which it is. But I'm thinking, I've seen all these pictures. I open that book, there's 40 pictures I've never seen. I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah,
It's insane, man.
interesting.
It
Yeah, but
is.
I mean, that does totally fit the vibe of the art school kid. As somebody that went to an art school, um, you just make so many different friends that are majored in so many different things, that have so many different interests, and
Mhm.
eventually you end up having like a phone book or a circle of friends where you know somebody that knows how to do anything. Like, I need
Yeah.
somebody that's a videographer. I know a guy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
And I think that's part of how they ended up being so photographed as well. Is like they just were a part of that time period in Liverpool where the art scene was growing.
Yeah. I mean, John went to art college with Stu. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but yeah, that's again shapes who those guys become. We never gave Stu a shout out, really. We didn't go much into that. Kids, there's a great movie called Backbeat, and Stephen Dorff actually plays Stuart Sutcliffe. Phil, it's worth your time if you haven't seen it. I always enjoyed it. Unfortunately, they couldn't play any licensed Beatles music in the movie. So, which was actually okay because in Hamburg they were playing covers anyway quite a bit. So
Hmm.
it works. But Stewart died very young. I want to say he was 23, maybe when he died, 24. But there's myths about what happened to him too. It was supposedly head injury from a fight. He and John were in a scuffle with some guys, but supposedly that's not what happened. But either way, I think it was a brain aneurysm that killed him. But
Wow.
yeah, died way too soon as well. Yeah, man. Good movie, by the way. Backbeat's a really good flick. I always enjoyed it. But yeah, as we said, kids, as we're getting into part two here, you're getting a lot of clips behind the scenes. You're getting a lot of great music. Still a lot of voiceovers, of course, because the guys are telling their story, what you expect in this documentary series. But I love it. I just love that we're getting the soundtrack as it's developing. You can hear how their styles changed and how they became a very polished band as time went on. And you kind of feel like during the course of this episode, if you didn't know anything about them, Phil, you're like, well, they must be prepping for something. And then by the end of episode 2, you figure out what they're prepping for.
Yes.
So
It's fascinating watching Paul now in retrospect list off all of these songs that flopped before their first major hit, which is
yeah.
She Loves You. And so like him saying like please please me and all these other things that flops, it's like, well, wait a minute. These are like very well known popular Beatles songs, but I only know that of course now after the fact.
Right. Of course. Yeah. 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 Because nothing was working in the UK. Like the UK loved them. They were a hit, but like they couldn't get the charts, man. They couldn't. And like, not until She Loves You, and then it hits in America. And they didn't want to go to America. Remember, they were talking about they'd seen other acts go to the States and it didn't work out. It's like Cliff Richard, they mentioned somebody else, but like British acts would go to the States and it wouldn't work. And they're like, we don't want to do that. We have to have a number one before we go to the States. So they did. Makes a lot of sense, actually. I love the flashback of them playing for the Queen. It's like the stuff of legend, as a lot of other things are with this band, Phil, when John's like, for the people in the cheap seats, clap your hands, and for the rest of you, rattle your jewelry. That's such good stuff, man. We haven't got this quote yet. I don't think it's happened in the first 2 episodes, but there's that great quote by John. It says, "We were 4 working class musicians who stayed working class." Phil, is that one of the things to you that sets this band apart from a lot of their peers at the time, maybe?
Yeah, I think that there is a charm to this band, and I think that comes across when they're showing like that compilation of all of their interviews and how their humor is coming across. Um, there's just there's kind of this level of like zaniness or like uh for a lack of better words, they don't come off as like what you expect from a rock band. And I think that's a big part of their
Mm,
appeal. I think that's definitely a big part of their appeal was teenage girls at the time.
mm. 'Cause they were approachable. They felt like real people, you
Yeah,
know?
there's a congeniality to them. That's the word I was looking for. That
Yeah.
like I like when you look at Elvis, Elvis feels like this big star. Like he feels like he's big, this guy that's on a pedestal. The Beatles didn't initially come off that way.
Yeah. Yeah, girls thought they were cute, of course, but Elvis was just flat out handsome. Like like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that could be part of the reason why men enjoyed the Beatles too, is like they're not really threatening too awful much, physically anyway. Not like Elvis is.
Yeah, I can't really explain it. There's something pure to them as a group.
Yeah,
And I think it came across initially during Beatlemania that they just looked so different than anything else.
yeah. And all the bands that came after them who wore the same suits, played the same instruments, stood in the same formation. Dude, even drummers who set their kits the way Ringo sets his kit.
because they were all trying to mimic the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I mean, it either worked or it didn't. But it didn't work for anybody the way it worked for the Beatles, of course. But yeah, everything changes, man. Like everything changed. Kids, if you do not understand, I get it. All of this happened before my time as well. Okay. But here's what I'll tell you. To truly understand what this band did, you need to go and educate yourself. Please and thank you.
Yeah.
There's a the history of rock and roll in 500 songs. It's a great podcast, Phil. The dude does a bang up job. But like basically everybody in the industry, Phil, when this band broke, everybody's like, well, get the suits, get the guitars, cut your hair, let's go. Because they all jumped on the train as it was going.
Yeah, when you look at like the different eras and like you said, the history of rock and roll music, and how, yeah, at one point, uh, a rock musician looked a certain way,
Mm.
and then when they hit the scene, it changed, and of course, it changed again after them, and it kept evolving. But yeah, it's impossible if you know the history of it, and you see like the stark contrast of guys that we mentioned earlier, like uh, Chuck Berry or Little Richard, and just how different they looked in comparison to the Beatles. And like when a guy like Jimi Hendrix comes along, and he goes to London, and how different he looks, and how different the scene is by that time period. I mean, to your point of just like how influential they were when Jimmy is in London and he plays the gig there, and he comes in with Sergeant Pepper, and he plays the opening song of it. Like, yeah, the Beatles were massive. Like, I
Yeah.
know like the hype of the Beatles feels like it's exaggeration or it's hyperbole, but no, it's all well earned. It's all very well earned.
Yeah. And it's mania is the best word. And we'll get there for episode 3, kids, because trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. You think the crowds are loud in the first two, in the second episode, you ain't seen nothing yet. Like it's off the charts. You ever met somebody that saw them live, by the way?
I have not.
I've met 2 people that saw them live. And this was years and years ago, of course, when I talked to both these folks. But one of them said it was a night they never forgot. It's maybe the best moment of their lives. This person was older and had grandkids. I'm not making this up. And another person told me, I was like, well, how was it? And he's like, couldn't hear a thing. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, man, you couldn't hear a thing. Screaming. I couldn't even hear the band. He's like, but best day ever. Best night ever. Because like the experience of being in the room with the band and seeing them, even though no one could hear them. Man. We've talked before on the 6M, Phil, about who possibly since the Beatles has had that sort of an impact. And like it's been spurts, right, throughout the years. There's been bands here and there that have, you could even argue that the boy bands of the 90s had those spurts of popularity, and they're still popular today, but like I just don't think any band's ever had the impact this band has had, especially again, the word mania feels the only word that works really.
The only person that I think has been as big or had as big of an impact on people is Michael Jackson. Growing
That's
up,
fair.
there
Yeah.
was nobody bigger than Michael Jackson. I mean, I know people to this day that like I've seen people like talk about going to see him and fainting, and like people
Yeah.
like I've all the way to a point. I had a friend in grammar school. We went to a summer camp, and we went to this show, and there was a guy that was a Michael Jackson impersonator,
Mm.
and just this guy impersonating Michael, there were people in the crowd crying.
Oh, wow.
That's how
Really?
big Michael Jackson was. Michael Jackson, there are people like grown men to this day that like talk about Michael Jackson like he's Santa Claus, like he's this big myth that was bigger than anything. Like I mean, I don't know if you've seen Warren G on Club Shay Shay, and how he talked about meeting him for the first time and how big it was for him, and as a grown man meeting him, it was just like it touched him. Like when he was like, Mike knew his music and he complimented his music, and he's like a grown man getting ready to cry in front of him. It's like
Mm.
Mike was the only one that I think reached that kind of level, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, no, it's well said. Yeah, he's got to be the guy. I can't think of anyone else that honestly don't think anybody even comes close to Michael in terms of doing that. And like, it's one of those things, Phil, where like you get something happening like that, you can't. How in the world do you recapture that? Well, I mean, we talked a lot about Buddy Holly, but just on this episode, we mentioned him several times. I don't know that we adequately set the stage for how this band hit at the right time. We talked about the planets lined up for these four guys to be in the same room at the same time. Buddy Holly had died. Richie Valens was gone. Rock and roll was dead. There were crooners in
Yeah.
music, right?
Elvis got drafted, right?
Yes.
hmm
I mean, there again, Phil, the planets lining up in the real world where these guys walked out and said, "Oh, here we are." And then the lid blew off. You can't recreate that. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
it's possible.
Yeah. The British invasion is such a big part of rock and roll history.
Mhm.
And yeah, they sparked that. They were right at the center of it.
Yeah, and cameras following them everywhere they went. Decoy cars, which really starts happening by episode 3 because they were running from girls and running from photographers. And
Yeah.
oh my, I'm sure that was fun in the beginning. Ringo's always said that it was fun the whole time.
Well,
Ringo's like,
that fits Ringo.
it does, right?
Ringo is so carefree, unbothered by most things. He's just like, what? It's funny.
Yeah. We're popular. We're getting over. It's great. Yeah. Oh my. It's like one of those things, be careful what you wish for, I guess.
Yeah, peace and love, peace and love.
All the time
Warning
with the
you with peace and love.
Yeah.
It will go in the bin. We can't do it anymore. Do not send us any more letters. Peace and love, peace and love. But it will go in the bin. That's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite Ringo Starr bits. That clip of him is so funny.
Oh my God, that is so good. Yeah, I can't. It just brings it all back home to me. I don't know if I've ever said this on the show. Maybe I have. I didn't come to this band until I was a grown man. I didn't. I was aware of their music. I knew who they were, but like I didn't. It wasn't until the anthology. But it was right before the anthology. For whatever reason, I guess the radio station started playing them again because the anthology was coming up.
Mhm.
But I'm like, Phil, that's where it started for me. So it didn't start it for me until I was 22 years old, 23, 22, something like that, when I really started developing my love for this band and then learned everything I could possibly learn about them. So,
Yeah,
It-
I didn't get into them until college. It was like maybe 19 or 20.
I mean, their ability to speak to everybody. I mean, I to this day, that's why I love music as much as I love it, because it can hit you on the right day and it can speak to anybody. And somebody will tell you, "Hey, this song did something for me." You're like, "That band? That singer?" But man, people connect to stuff in very different ways, man. Like you and I said before here on the show about you connect to music because of relationships, because of where you were in your life at the time. Music plays a big part in that, man.
Definitely.
Yeah. I won't tell you what was happening to me in 95. It wasn't great as far as the opposite sex. I'm just saying it was not great. So yeah, I remember. But never fear, kids, because everything's great in Beatleland at the moment. And as we wind up with episode 2 here, Brian Epstein's still with us, which is good. They've got their first number 1, which is also good. They've been touring all through England, all through the world at this point, or at least other countries. And they land, and in case you want to know the date, it's etched in my memory. They land in the United States February 7th, 1964, and they appear on The Sullivan Show 2 days later. And that's how we end episode 2 before we see them on Sullivan. So, yeah, looking forward to it. We'll cover parts 3 and 4 in the next episode, kids. So, everybody stay tuned for that. But what do you think about this, man, going through parts 1 and 2? I mean, I know you said you probably hadn't watched the whole thing all the way through, but you knew some of this stuff. Did you get anything from the first 2 episodes that you didn't know, maybe?
There was quite a few things that I didn't know about like their early lives. Of course, at this point, like a lot of the lore has been discussed to death in documentaries and a bunch of other things, but there were some things that I didn't know about their lives growing up that I thought was interesting. I think a lot of stuff of like their childhood and how they met each other was interesting.
Mhm.
Paul talking about riding the bus together and how they bonded over music. I thought
Mm.
that that was great.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Them playing on the decker bus, the double decker bus playing on top. No one on it but them. Oh, I gotta tell you, man, I'm gonna circle back to these movies. The real story behind this band, I've always said could make for a phenomenal movie. I never thought it would make for 4 movies on the same freaking day.
um, yeah, yeah.
Oof.
It's. I mean, because the real story is their friendship. The real story is like these are guys that were friends very early on since they were kids, and they went on like this insane journey together,
Mhm.
and just how they grew and how they grew apart, how they grew as men. It's just it is a really great story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, we'll cover that when it gets here, kids, but you got a year or so, I think, before we get there. I think the movies, do they come out next year, I believe? 2026? Something like that. But cast is good. Cast looks good. Who knows? I don't know if these guys are going to actually sing or not. I mean, Jamie Foxx and later Joaquin Phoenix, and really Gary Busey with the Buddy Holly story. They set the bar. I hear that Jeremy Allen White flick, that Springsteen movie. It's great. I haven't seen it yet, but man, Jeremy Allen White sings and he sounds phenomenally, just like Bruce. Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. We'll definitely cover those movies when they get here, kids. I guess. Phil, can you afford to see 4 movies in the span of a weekend? I don't know if I got that kind of cabbage over here, man. You
Yeah,
might have to spot me a few bucks for that to happen.
it kind of feels like wait until it's time to binge it because I don't know
Yeah.
about sitting through an entire movie going experience for 4 movies.
I mean, I'm definitely going to go to the theater. Now, which one I see, I don't know, but I'm definitely going to go to the theater. So we'll see. Depending on how my weekend's going, I might watch 2 of them, but I don't know. That's not cheap, kids. It's not cheap. Well, Phil, before we get out of here and call it a day, let's get your last word on parts 1 and 2 of the Beatles Anthology.
A fun watch. I assume it's going to get into a lot of stuff that we know more of the band for in the next 2 episodes because we get into the jump to America and of course the Sullivan Show and all of the stuff that is like at this point American history.
Yes, good call.
So yeah, some of that stuff is more familiar to me than of course a lot of the stuff in the first 2 episodes because it takes place in England.
Yeah, yes. I'm glad you put it all like that because, like, I'm gonna say it's hard to remember that they're not American, which is dumb. We know they're not American. But man, the way they were just embraced here and still are embraced. Sometimes you're like, "Oh, that's right. They're not from here." It just I don't know. I don't know if I'm the only person that feels that way, but that's kinda how it feels to me.
Yeah, I think they came at the right time. Um,
Yes.
I can't remember which documentary there is. Of course, there's a documentary around uh their trip to the US, right? Haven't we done an episode about that?
We've covered that, yes. It was on, Apple TV, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think that, it was the right time in America for Americans to be accepting of them. And yeah,
Mhm.
again, it's just hard to really describe how big they were at that time period.
Yeah, I mean, kids, all you got now is the footage. That's all you got to prove it to you. So I guess if you don't want to believe 2 podcast hosts, go watch and listen to footage of kids screaming and
Yeah.
fellow musicians talking about how great they were and people who was inspired by them. Go and listen to all that and watch it, and then still hate them because you're freaking weird. I guess I don't know. I just don't
I
get
mean,
it, but
it's hard for me to describe just how big Michael Jackson was at his peak
mhm.
to people now. And I mean I grew up in that time period. I'm an 80s baby, so I guess it's the same time. Time. You know, if you weren't there, it's hard to really understand it. I think it's gonna be like that for people after this generation when they're describing how big Beyonce was.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's different. I mean, I get it, but yeah, I think it's different. But no, it makes sense. Again, you can, Phil, people can have their opinions, but when you say things to me like, "Okay, I don't like this band," all right, cool, to each his own. But when you say they can't play, the song sucked, they didn't mean anything, well, then now you're just being stupid because that's not a smart opinion. That is a moronic thing to say. They didn't mean anything. Are you kidding? Like,
It's
I
a
don't
it's an
know.
uninformed opinion. And I think, like I said
Yeah.
earlier, a lot of people see them as like I think a lot of people that are like their music wasn't for me. They think of like the doo-wop stuff,
Mhm.
and I think if you just look at the doo-wop stuff, that's like a very specific period of their career, and
Mhm.
like the where they really evolved as a band was after that.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're not the same band later.
Yeah, and so I
Um,
think if you're just looking at it like, oh, I wasn't into doo-wop, I wasn't into like what seemed like the boy band craze of Beatlemania initially, sure, but I think those people also are not like take into account like Revolver or Rubber Soul and like the stuff that really changed them as a band.
mhm. I totally agree. Yeah. Kids, we've covered a lot of that stuff here on the 6M. I think we haven't covered every Beatles album. We've covered, I think, at least half of them, I believe. And we've done Beatles 64 and we've done Get Back. And yeah, we've done episode just on Paul is Dead. So if you're a Beatles guy, go check that one out because that's a good one. We got lots more to talk about, kids. Thanks a lot for hanging out with us. We hope you dug the first episode here, which again covered episodes 1 and 2. And be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode of the 6M podcast. We're going to continue covering the anthology series until we're done. Christmas is going to hit in the meantime. We'll put out a Christmas episode. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that as well. But thanks to everybody, as always, for sharing, for liking, subscribing on Boink Studios on YouTube and following us on boinkstudios.com. We appreciate you very much. And check us out next week again, as I said, for another brand new episode. But for now, that is the Beatles Anthology, parts 1 and 2. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at 6M Podcasts. We'll see you next time.